has to do with what we teach our children. If the children think that, or anyone, that we people are just products of Darwinian evolution, why would we be surprised to see what happened in Christchurch, in Auckland, and other violent gang centers, locations? We know it happens in other parts of the globe. But it also happens in New Zealand. For a number of years I've studied creationist science and evolution, and what the message is of the one and the other. And I have found that creation science is something where we can all find truth, whereas in the theory of evolution I can only find lies, things that do not speak to my heart, but rather justify my pleasures and desires to do whatever I want. Creation science brings me closer to a creator that is very highly intelligent and who made me superior to animals, who gave me so many blessings which I can not stop counting. Whereas evolution doesn't tell me anything of blessings and of the love of a creator. With this video I want to show you something that I like you to be aware for yourself and for others that are around you. Mainly be aware of that you're loved by God and that God exists. And now I want to show you a clip of Kent Hovind, a man who is being put into prison for some crime, but he dedicated his life to creation science and to teach at schools a creator who cares and loves all humanity.
I gave my heart to the Lord and decided my entire purpose in life would be to win other people to Jesus Christ. My dad went off to World War II and joined the Marines and was the only survivor of his platoon at the end. I began to run across creationist material. The earth is not millions of years old.
The Bible says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge.
One heart, one soul, one conscience.
We worship an awesome God.
Persecuted men like Brother Kent Hovind. Great myths replaced the Christian Bible as the foundation of the new Nazi religion.
200 years ago, I'm telling you right now, there would be no aliens.
IRS back in the news. They're reaching a so-called secret agreement with atheists.
You guys need to realize that kid's in prison. He needs to be released. And all you talk show radio hosts and all you preachers who have turned your back on Kent, there's going to come a day when you're going to need somebody. And God help you.
What Hitler did with his concentration camps and killing the Jews, I don't think it's possible to understand what Hitler did and why he did it until you see how evolution ties in.
I decided I want to follow Jesus and win people to him. Because of that, there are people that hate me.
The work of Kent Hovind and his documentary An Atheist's Worst Nightmare can be viewed here on YouTube. There's 3 parts and each part is about half an hour. The next clip that I want to show is an example of deception that takes place in universities today by well-known and outstanding psychologists and doctors, professors. And this clip is taken from a lecture from a university professor in Canada.
Well, I'm quite enamored of lobsters, as some of you might know, because I found out, this just blew me away when I found it out. I mean, I've done a lot of work in neurochemistry, functional neurochemistry, because I used to study alcoholism and drug abuse. And alcoholism, to study alcohol, you have to know a lot about the brain because alcohol goes everywhere in the brain. It affects every neurochemical system. And so if you're going to study alcohol, you kind of have to study neurochemistry in general. And so I did that for quite a long time. I really got enamored of a book called The Neuropsychology of Anxiety by Jeffrey Gray, which is an absolute work of genius, although extraordinarily I don't know how many references that book has. It's like, must be 1,000. And Gray actually read them. And worse, he understood them. And then he integrated them into this book. And so to read it, you have to really master functional neurochemistry and animal behaviorism and motivation and emotion and neuroanatomy. Like, it's a killer book, but man, it's really rich. And it's taken psychologists about 40 years to really unpack that book. But one of the things I learned about that was just exactly how much continuity there was in the neurochemistry of human beings and the neurochemistry of animals. It's absolutely staggering. It's the sort of thing that makes the fact of evolution something like self-evident. I do think it's self-evident for other reasons that I'll tell you about later. I think evolution, or I think natural selection, random mutation and natural selection is the only way you can solve the problem of how to deal with an environment that's complex beyond your ability to comprehend. I think the way that the problem of complexity has been solved, and this is the best argument I know of for the truth of the Darwinian notion of evolution. Now, I don't think that our models of evolution are complete by any stretch of the imagination. I know they're not, partly because of recent work done on epigenetics, which suggests that you can inherit acquired traits, right? And when I went to university, when I started going to university in the 1980s, that was heresy, really. Like, no, you cannot inherit acquired traits, but actually you can inherit acquired traits. That's the field of epigenetics studies that, and that's a radical shift in perspective, because we also don't know exactly what that means across any length of time. And when you're thinking about evolutionary lengths of time, you're thinking about 3.5 billion years, because that's the span of time over which life evolved. And so even things that don't have a overwhelmingly marked potency for one generation can be unbelievably powerful across time. And then there's also the issue of sexual selection, because you'll hear Darwinists continually describe the world and the evolutionary world as a place of randomness. And that's not true. And I don't know why they make that statement. The mutations are random or quasi-random, because we don't understand mutations that well yet either. And most mutations are deadly, right? Most mutations are deadly. There's a set of them that are harmful but not deadly, and then there's a tiny, tiny proportion that could, in principle, produce some benefit to the next generation, assuming environmental shift, say, in the direction of the mutation. So, and there's a randomness element to that. We know that. I mean, part of the reason that you mutate, or your cells mutate, your DNA mutates, is because of background levels of radioactivity. And a lot of that's a consequence of solar activity, right? So cosmic rays come zipping through the atmosphere and they nail your DNA and produce minor alterations, and that's a mutation. And if you crank up the background radiation rate, like say around Chernobyl, then the mutation rate rises, and there's definitely a random element to that. And it's necessary for there to be a random element because, as far as I can tell, the only way you can beat a random environment is by producing random changes, right? So, you know the idea, basically. The environment isn't some static place that's selecting for higher and higher levels of fitness, or it's certainly not doing that in any static way. And so it's shifting around randomly. And then, you know, you have a structure your species has a structure that's a consequence of this immense evolutionary journey, and it's moderating itself randomly within certain parameters, the parameters being that most mutations will kill you, like alterations in your fundamental form generally tend to kill you, so they're incremental. And so the mutations are random, and they match, hopefully, they match the randomness in the environmental shift, and so you can more or less keep up that way. But then there's additional complicating factors, and they're not trivial. And one of them is whatever epigenetics does. We don't know anything about that yet. But the second one is sexual selection. And sexual selection is no joke. It could be the primary thing. It's certainly one of the primary things that's driven human evolution. And I think you can say that you think about the environment again. Well, let's think about the environment. So you have a dominance hierarchy, and that's really an old structure. The dominance hierarchy is 300 million years old, because it emerged pretty much whenever there was a nervous system, emergent nervous system, and whenever animals had to occupy the same territory, they automatically organized themselves into something approximating a dominance hierarchy. So it's a very, 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 very old structure. It's older than trees. It's older than flowers. It's old. And as far as real goes from a Darwinian sense, permanent is real. And so when you can say, well, you know, our arboreal ancestors adapted themselves to trees, and so the tree was around long enough to be a feature of the environment. But the dominance hierarchy has been around a lot longer than trees. And you can think of the dominance hierarchy both as an adaptation to the environment, because you'd kind of think about the dominance hierarchy as a cultural construct. But if a cultural construct lasts long enough, then it becomes part of the environment. And so the dominance hierarchy is part of the environment. And what seems to happen, roughly speaking, and this is an oversimplification, but we'll go with it, is that males have a dominance hierarchy, and there's a relatively small number of males that are relatively successful, and those successful males have preferential access to female reproductive capacity, either because the females actively choose the more dominant males, which is very, very common, or because the more dominant males chase all the less dominant males away, so that even if the females don't exercise choice, which they often do, then the only males left around that can serve as reasonable mating partners are the more powerful ones. And so you think you've got two really radical determiners of evolution as a consequence of that. One is that I'm not talking about female dominance hierarchies at the moment, but I can talk about them, but that's why this is an oversimplification. But what happens is that the males obviously are selected for their ability to move up dominance hierarchies.
Why did Mary, the mother of Jesus, decide to be a virgin? Is it maybe because of her social status, or because God didn't want any more children with her, or she being a eunuch anyway? Is it because of that she chose to be a virgin? Or another reason being said, if virginity helped her to be detached from the world, could she still also be detached, even though by sharing all she has with a foster child, Jesus, and the man in her house that didn't have intercourse with her, but had to work hard in the world in order to meet all the needs for survival? Could that be a reason why she chose virginity? How did she serve her family? The wife of a hard-working carpenter, a carpenter who probably had to lift heavy weights without cranes, all by manpower. I can imagine she didn't have many boring moments in her life, but her tummy to be filled with hard-earned bread. How many other foster children did she take on after all, even though not having much for herself, her first foster child and her husband? Would she, as a woman and a weak one, have claimed equality in the way so many women claim? Or was it rather a natural thing, not in need to be discussed? Could she have claimed equality? Women and likewise men always complained about inequality. But Mary, isn't she the one who shows us the most noble way to overcome inequality? With what joy we sing of Mary, a woman of great love, whose openness and loving kindness gave birth to God's own Son. Mary, oh so gentle and discreet, be with us as we pray, to know the whisper of His presence, the wonder of His love.